So when I grab a tumbler, I grab whichever one's closest to the front, whatever lid fits it, regardless of what brand, and I fill it up with coffee and I go about my day. I never thought tumblers would become a fashion statement, but over the last couple of months, they have. So in this video, we're going to torture test them to see if they hold up to their price. In front of us, we have the Stanley cup. That's a $30 tumbler. Ridiculous. YETI, $35 tumbler. You thought these things probably would have come down in price by now. Built, Walmart, 10 bucks. RTIC. This is a very popular one. It's about $20, and this was kind of made to compete directly against the YETI. Over here is another RTIC, spelled slightly different. Also a $20 tumbler. It feels a lot cheaper than this one, though, but we'll see how it holds up. And then I picked up a $7 tumbler off of Amazon because it was the cheapest one I could find. We're going to subject these things to hell, and we're going to see which ones make it out at the other end. And yes, this is RV and truck related because every RV owner and truck owner has a tumbler, so you might care if you accidentally knock it off something, run over it, or even abuse it in other ways. Let's enjoy this video. Hang tight. I'll be right back. So from 31 inches off the ground, the first test is going to be the oops, I knocked it off the counter test, starting with the cheapest Amazon cup. Next is the Walmart built tumbler. The RTIC cup. The other RTIC cup. The Stanley cup. And finally, the YETI Rambler. Okay, so as mild as you might think that test was, believe it or not, some of these sustained some pretty decent damage from 31 inches onto a concrete floor. Let's look at the YETI first. So the YETI doesn't show too much damage. Everything looks really good up here. But look at the bottom. We have a fairly substantial dent in the bottom of it. Moving on, the RTIC cup. Look at that. So that's where the rod actually hit it. I didn't hit them any harder than any of the other ones. You can see a pretty sizable dent there, and on the bottom, also another sizable dent. The built cup, no dent from where I hit it, but the bottom has a pretty mild dent in it, honestly. It's not too bad. Actually, you really can't feel it. You can tell it's flattened out just a little bit. The other RTIC cup actually suffered a pretty significant dent here at the bottom. But aside from that, that's really the only damage. I'm surprised the plastic lids don't show any damage. The heaviest of them, the Stanley cup, let's see here. Looks like it may have just scuffed up slightly on the bottom right here. No dent. And no dent in the side either. So that one did actually pretty well. And then the cheapest Amazon cup I could find. Well, it's also the lightest cup out here as well, but you can see where it hit, really no dent as well. I think the biggest issue here is probably just the weight of the cup hitting the ground. But as mild as this was, there was some damage. So the next test simulates what it's like leaving your tumbler inside of your backpack when you're in school, because we all know kids do that. So let's throw it in our backpack. And let's see how it holds up to a typical child jostling their backpack around. Okay, so your kid comes home from school and you pull their tumbler out of their bag to inspect it. This one actually held up okay. This is the cheapest Amazon one. Has a few little bumps and bruises on it. Let's go to the Walmart built one. We lost our lid. I think that's right over here. Let's see. The lid held up good, no damage to it. The tumbler itself, it's a little scratched up. I don't think we have any more dents in it though, but it held up pretty good. Next we're going to go to the RTIC. This one has a few more dents in it. The lid is fine and the lid is still on, so kudos to both Amazon and this RTIC, ARCTIC. And that one held up okay. What about this RTIC? This one held up okay as well. So the lid stayed on this one. It's a little bit beaten up. Not much yet. Actually, it's got some pretty good dents here at the bottom and on the side still, but most of those were from the first test. Let's look at the Stanley. Stanley cup fared well. Handle still looks good. Has a couple little bruises and abrasions on it. But for the most part, no real damage. Yeti's dirty, but looks like it's held up pretty well. Lid is still on there as well. So, I figured the Stanley lid would stay on because it's screwed on, but the rest of them did really well. The only lid that came off was the bilt, and possibly because it has such a large piece that kind of overlaps the side right there. But they've all held up well. On to the next test. So we all know that kids always leave their stuff out, and what inevitably happens is they get ran over by a tractor. So we're going to run these over with the tractor just to see which one holds up. I'm skeptical on this one. I have a feeling a few of them will be knocked out of the contest, but let's find out. So this is the test that's also a lesson for our kids whenever they leave toys laying outside and possibly in the path of a vehicle. Now my tractor only weighs about 4,000 pounds. It's not very heavy. Let's check these out. So the Amazon cheap cup is completely out. It is destroyed. The built cup from Walmart, also destroyed. That was a $10 cup. That was a $7 cup. RTIC cup, $20. Yeah, this one didn't fare too well. I'd say it's pretty much out of the race too. Now this one kind of deformed in an awkward way. So this is the other RTIC cup. This one's a lot lighter weight than that one, but check it out. The lid isn't even cracked off. This one did surprisingly well. You could actually still drink out of this one and drink your coffee. Wow, that's really cool. I would say this one's kind of still in the race. Interesting. All right, the Stanley cup. Well, the Stanley cup definitely suffered some damage, but to be honest with you, it is completely usable. That is really the only dent that this cup has. Wow, but it's also the heaviest, so it feels the strongest. I bet the lid just functions perfectly. That is crazy. Wow, so yeah, that's super strong. But what about the YETI? So the YETI also did exceptionally well. They both were so strong, they got caught up on the front tire, and then I drove over them. So, if you want to really get down to it, they withstood the most abuse of any of the others because they didn't instantly crumble under the weight. Lids, perfectly fine. And this is kind of crazy because if you look at the cost of all of these, it kind of goes in order with how much you pay, right? That is by far the cheapest at $7. $10 is the built from Walmart. The RTIC, that was actually like $19. This RTIC was $20. The Stanley was $30, and the YETI was $35. And, strangely enough, the price of the cup actually matters when it comes to how strong they are. Anyways, these three cups are still usable. These three cups absolutely are not. So they are out after the third test, and these three continue on. So I think as parents, we all know by now that when we get our kids tumblers, at some point they're going to leave it perfectly positioned upright under the bucket of an excavator with all of its downforce pressure pushing on it. So, let's go ahead and do this test because I think this is a realistic test of what a tumbler may go through. So I gotta admit, this test is pretty comprehensive, and by giving you a demonstration of what normal use looks like for today's children, you know, this is probably a pretty good example of where you should spend your money. So, this was the cheap Amazon cup, $7, didn't fare too well. Followed up by the Walmart built cup. This thing actually fared well originally, but then, unfortunately, it's not great at getting ran over. The RTIC cup, it failed the tractor test, and it also failed the excavator test. Two very realistic examples of what could happen whenever you buy something for your child. The other RTIC did okay. You could probably still drink from this. It's deformed, but it's not so much so that you probably couldn't have, you know, 10 ounces of a really hot coffee if you really wanted to drink out of it. Stanley cup, honestly, it did pretty good. You know, the reason why you saw them all shift over and collapse is because when the bottom buckled, you know, naturally it's going to tilt whichever way it's going to start leaning. And, you know, it did okay. I'm not going to lie. The Stanley cup fared okay. You probably have about 16 ounces worth of drinkable fluid left in here. That's pretty good. And the lid did really well. You know, you could probably attempt to screw this on to a non-crushed Stanley cup and drink some liquid out of it. Does the latch still go up? And the latch still works. That is awesome. But Stanley cup fared okay. But the ultimate winner here was the YETI. The YETI Rambler. Look at this thing. This cup does not look like it went through what we just subjected it to. And the lid didn't even crack. Look at that. The lid is still completely intact. I could probably wrestle it off with a slotted screwdriver. But check this out. This had the full weight of the excavator's front resting on it. I pulled the tracks off the ground with the bucket resting on this, and I got out and actually took a picture of it, then climbed back in the excavator. The YETI did really well, and kind of a disclaimer here, I am not a YETI fan. I don't own YETI cups because I bought them. I own them because people have gifted them to me. So that is really cool. I'm really surprised how well the YETI did. I'm actually surprised how well the Stanley did up until the last test. The rest of them, this is typical stuff that kids are going to subject them to. So spend your money wisely. But what do you guys think of my my test here? Leave a comment below.
Daddy, do you know where my Stanley cup is?
Nope.